Today we're back to look at a few more new previewed models. We've got a new Primaris Techmarine, a Chaplain on bike, better pictures of the Silent King, and this Ctan is confirmed to be none other than the mysterious Void Dragon. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been covering the new 9th edition miniatures and news as it's been coming out. Today Games Workshop hosted a live stream on their Warhammer Live Twitch channel, showed off a bunch of the Indomitus models fighting each other and talked a little bit about their abilities, which was kind of interesting, but we've kind of already seen most of their datasheets now, so it's not the biggest deal ever. I think by far bigger news were the miniatures that they showed off throughout the preview, giving us 4 short videos on 4 miniatures that we hadn't seen close up. The Techmarine and Chaplain on bike are miniatures that I don't believe we've seen in any form so far, and the Silent King and the Void Dragon we had seen as part of the Necron army shot, but it's really handy to get a better look at their miniatures up close. Let's jump straight into it. So first of all, this is the Primaris Techmarine, who I'm glad they've now got to realising in an actual plastic miniature. When they redid things like the Primaris Apothecary, Captain, Librarian and Chaplain over the last few years of releases, the Techmarine seemed like a really obvious oversight to me, just as an absolutely iconic character from Space Marine lore that would feel very weird if he wasn't represented in their new range. He's not too dissimilar in some design features to Ironfather Phyros, except of course Phyros himself is wearing Gravis armour, so there's some similarities but some differences. They've gone for a little bit of a different take to the standard Space Marine Techmarine. Rather than having just a servo arm jutting out at a random point from his backpack, they seem to be very much using that servo arm in coordination with his own hand, as if he's using his hands to direct the motion of the servo arm, which to be honest might be a little bit more sensible in terms of real life application of this thing. I'm not entirely sure how Techmarines go about operating their servo arms while their hands are doing something completely different. You'd think you'd have to be thinking about quite a lot of things at once. They mentioned during the stream that he has a head swap option with a non-helmeted head if you prefer that, though I think that the head on this one looks fine myself. He's got a little mechadendrite tentacle thing poking around his right hand side of him. And in terms of war gear, he's armed with this absolutely enormous axe, which I'd certainly hope would have some sort of abilities above and beyond a standard power axe. Wouldn't be surprised if we see something. I certainly hope to see multi-damage or something on it. It really doesn't just feel like a one-damage weapon like they get at the moment. Very much like Ironfather Phyros of the Iron Hands, he also appears to be sporting a heavy bolter over his right shoulder. I believe it looks like a heavy bolter, but maybe a bit of a lighter one. I can't wait to see what the stats of this backpack-mounted light heavy bolter can do. I believe like most Techmarines he'll have Artificer armour giving him a 2+ armour save, and I was interested to see if this guy might gain a Signum array as well, much like Phyros or Tor Garadon, who can both give +1 to a unit's hit rolls in the shooting phase. Seems like that isn't going to be an option on the standard Techmarine. In any case, I'm glad that they've managed to update him now. You couldn't really have a Space Marine chapter without Techmarines, so I'm glad that Primaris have got one. Moving on now, we've got a full close-up picture of the Silent King at last. We had of course already seen the model in fairly decent detail from the previous previews that they'd shown of him, but now we get to see him in all of his glory. He's standing pretty enormously tall compared with the Necrons nearby him. Everyone appears to be armed with interesting relic staffs of light or something, and he's got that tortured looking bound Ctan powering his throne. In the background, this guy is pretty much the head of the Necron race, although many dynasties would dispute his overall leadership, and was a major figure in their deep lore, the Silent King originally being a hereditary title, but of course when they all got transformed into living metal, he's pretty much keeping that title permanently now. He's known as the Triarch because he generally commands as a group of 3, only ever communicating through his subordinates, which is why he's known as the Silent King. As we know already, he's going to be commanding his dynasty known as the Szarekh dynasty, which is the scheme that the rest of the Necrons are painted in, and that will be certainly an interesting one to see what sort of rules they get when the Necrons get on the table. I suspect that he's not going to be too easy to remove from the battlefield. It looks like he's got 2 floating shield things to either side of him, and just from the looks of them, I strongly suspect they're going to give him some sort of massive defensive buff, meaning that he'll have to shoot through them before he can actually target his throne. I strongly suspect that he's going to have some powerful command abilities, as well as be somewhat dangerous in close combat. One thing that I think is very likely is that he's going to be getting the Supreme Commander trait that we saw mentioned in the Supreme Command detachment, so basically you could likely run him in his own detachment as an overall commander for the Necron race, which would mean that you'd be able to field him alongside any dynasty. I'm pretty certain that that will happen in a similar sort of vein to what Ghazghkull and Shadowsun have got over the past few months. It'd be interesting to see if they do make him an HQ or a Lord of War. I think they could honestly go either way with him. It really wouldn't surprise me if he was a Lord of War though, as he really is a similar sort of importance to the Primarch and Demon Primarchs from the Necron point of view. Next we have this Primaris Chaplain Space Marine on bike. which we had found out was coming from the leaked points costs earlier in the week. I'm really glad that he did turn out to be true. He was one of the models which I thought, yes, that'd be absolutely amazing, but I'm going to need to see it to believe it 100%. And he very much feels like a direct replacement for the older style Chaplain on bike, who pretty much became the de facto face of the Warhammer Legends system, where they retire models that they no longer sell anymore, give them a final datasheet, and stop supporting their rules quite as much. It's really nice to see him updated and in style. I think they've done pretty well with this miniature. It definitely draws a lot of inspiration from the previous one, in particular that book that he's got mounted on the front of his bike, presumably so he can remember his litanies in battle. He's also got that interesting looking honorific type halo over the back of his head, which does seem to be a bit of a common theme between the Marines on this release. The Blade Guard have it, the Blade Guard Ancient has it, and the Captain and Lieutenant have them as well. I think it certainly helps denote them as special characters and just adds a little bit more ornateness and bling to the Primaris models when they can usually just be a little bit more plainer and generic looking. I think the biggest reason that I'm a fan of this guy is that we're finally getting some speed on the generic characters. Generally for a Space Marines list it's really good to be able to have fast moving characters to provide auras and actually get into close combat, compared with having all the Primaris characters on foot and either have to rely on transports or just really risk the fact that they're never going to get into close combat or can't coordinate their buffs quite as well. I think it's the reason that in more competitive play you tend to see most people running jump pack style characters as opposed to having to slowly foot slog about. So I'm kind of hoping that this heralds more bikes and jump packs to come for the regular Space Marine character range, as it'd be nice to have those options restored on the Primaris side. You never know, maybe we'll get things like Techmarines and Librarians on bikes down the line, which I'm sure would make a lot of Dark Angels and White Scars players happy. In terms of points cost, we've seen that he's already 130 points, whereas the regular Chaplains seem to be 85 in the new edition. It does mean that he is paying a really quite high price for his speed, so for the advantage of that enormous Outrider style bike, you are going to be paying basically the cost of 1.5 Chaplains. I think this is probably fairly well balanced, to be honest. In a slower style foot slogging list, you're probably going to be more tempted by the Chaplain or Chaplains on foot. Whereas if you are going for a more hard-hitting, fast approach type list, maybe using some of those Outriders or Inceptors or something, then it could well be worth it to make the jump. It looks like he's sporting twin bolt rifles, exactly the same as the rest of the Outriders, so his shooting is going to be far better than the standard Chaplain. I suspect that he'll be getting 7 wounds on this guy, seeing as the other Outriders are 2 wounds more than the standard Primaris stat line, so it makes sense that the bike might add 2 wounds for this guy too, which would be really quite tanky for a Chaplain model. And as I said, he's going to have some very good synergy with White Scars and Ravenwing. Even if he just goes around using his standard litany of re-rolling hits in close combat, that's going to synergize really well with things like Ravenwing Black Knights or the Primaris Outriders. He also could be pretty handy to bear and get them into combat where he needs them. Particularly that Relic Crozius from the core Space Marine book could be really nice on him, as on the bike he's going to be a lot faster to get it into combat and maybe be able to pick and choose his matchups that bit further. Finally, he could be pretty useful for getting litanies onto the board, maybe doing that tactic where you give plus 2 inches to charge and then move him to coordinate with some reserves coming on so they get a 7-inch charge rather than a 9-inch charge out of Deep Strike. Following this, we got a slightly closer look at the Ctan shard of the Void Dragon. Again, we have already seen this guy before from a bit of a distance. If you want a few closer up looks, then they released that full video on the Warhammer Live YouTube channel. I did think it was really quite interesting that they confirmed it as being the Void Dragon himself though, as he's been in the Necron backstory for a seriously long time. Originally in the older Necron fluff there were 4 Necron Ctans. The Nightbringer and Deceiver had awoken but the other 2 had not, and the Void Dragon was one of these. There's a lot of hazy backstory fluff that connects him to Mars. Supposedly he may have been lying dormant on Mars for absolutely millennia, and may be a factor as to why technological innovation took off there so much, with many people believing that he may be the inspiration behind the Omnissiah that the Tech Priests worship. He is still very much a Ctan shard, so the Necrons do control him, rather than the other way around and him running loose, but it will be interesting to see what sort of rules he can bring to the table. With all this technology and machine-related backstory, I'd be surprised if he doesn't have a very negative effect on other races' tanks and vehicles. Other than that, during the preview they of course had the different matches between the Indomitus Marines and the Necrons. They did fight small individual bouts rather than a full battle between the 2 sides of the box set, probably at least partly due to the social distancing rules. During the matchups, the Assault Intercessors fought against 20 warriors. We had 3 Outriders versus 12 Scarab Swarms, 3 Blade Guard and an Ancient versus 3 Scorpec Destroyers and the Plasma side, the Overlord versus the Captain, and the Scorpec Lord versus the Judiciar. They fought 3 rounds between every single match, but because they started quite so close together, it meant that the models that went first just won the bout every single time, until we got to the Scorpec Lord versus the Judiciar, where partly due to the Judiciar's special rules, this flips round, they each won when they went second, though the Scorpec Lord took the day in the end. Not really very meaningful in terms of how good these models will be in actual games, but it was quite fun to watch. They also clarified that they have made very large numbers of the Indomitus box, and they were trying to reassure people they should have enough to satisfy demand at least in the short term. Apparently they've made more of this box than they've ever made of a starter/launch box before. It is still going to be a limited edition set though, so they still advise being fairly prompt if you wanted to snag a copy. So overall, a fairly content-rich preview from the Warhammer community. I'm really quite impressed with just the amount of love that both Space Marines and Necrons are getting from this release. It's nice to find out there's still bits and bobs to come that we haven't found out about yet. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of the new Monolith and the new Space Marine Flyer/Landspeeder thing sometime in the future. Plus there's a Necron Assassin-y thing that we haven't seen too closely either. So if you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more similar news and rumours coverage like this, as well as some more detailed analysis of the datasheets as we go along. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page, which is what allows me to make all this content quite so regularly. If you are enjoying a lot of the videos, then any support is absolutely greatly appreciated, as it is what allows this channel to keep on going. If you're interested, then the Patreon link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.